Eugene's muted.
Oh, am I muted?
Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Not anymore. Not anymore.
Okay.
I love this. Would be our new intro. I like this. Can you hear me now? Like one of those old cell phone commercials.
I do. That guy now does commercials for another company too. So kind of funny how things work. They make fun of it from time to time. Either way, this is breakthrough news, assuming people can hear me. This is also the freedom side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, great to be back alongside you.
It's great to be back alongside you, Eugene, and I can, in fact, hear you now.
Excellent. Thank you. Perfect. Good to know. Good to be heard. I think that was Sprint back in the day. So we have good service here. Well, anyway, very happy to be back with you all. We got a great show for you, as we always do. Reminder for those who are watching on YouTube, now would be a great time for you to go ahead and hit the subscribe button, then hit the bell so you get the alerts for the things you subscribe to, including Dispatches with Rania Khalek, which is coming out on a regular basis here at Breakthrough News, and all of our other fantastic comments. So hit subscribe, hit the bell, and you will be good to go as a YouTube watcher. If you're watching us on Free Speech TV, just keep on watching and keep on supporting Free Speech TV. Shout out to the whole FSTV team, as always, for making it possible for us to be here with you. Rania, are there other things you would like our viewers to know?
Well, Eugene, in fact, there are other things I'd like our viewers to know. First and foremost, make sure you like, subscribe, and share the episode. Especially make sure you smash that like button. It helps boost the algorithm. Like button. Love it. And also, please do consider becoming a member of Patreon, of Breakthrough News if you are able to. For as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch, such as this very cool Breakthrough News mug, in addition to lots of other cool things, by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news and becoming a patron. This not only gets you access to exclusive content and merch, it also makes you a part of independent media and boosting it, funding it, making it happen. We are able to do this because of your support. So patreon.com/breakthrough news. I'm going to go ahead and show it there. Look at that. Patreon.com/breakthrough news. Yeah, fancy. And also, if you are more interested in doing a one-time donation, you can donate in the live chat. You can also go to breakthroughnews.org, become a big, give us as big a donation as you want there, but also make sure you are checking out our website. Because it's also a way to just like get your email on there, make sure you subscribe and you get emails from us and that sort of thing. So that's my spiel for the day, Eugene.
Well, it's a good spiel. And of course, we'd be great to have your email. Not only will we send you many things, but it's good to have as many points of contact as possible, because you never know what might happen. So you want to make sure that we can alert you as soon as possible to anything new happening that you might want to be alerted to ASAP. So definitely do all those things. Smash that like button, as Rania would say. Make sure you get in there, Patreon, whatever you can do. If you can donate in the show, we appreciate that too. We appreciate it all. The big shout out to everyone who's donated, shared, liked, talked about it, done anything. It's really, done everything in terms of pushing us forward here at Breakthrough News. So let's get right into it here today. Last week, Rania, Prime Minister Modi was in the United States to do a number of things, but certainly to meet with President Trump. Of course, longtime good relations between the two. And that's just one of many things happening as it concerns Mr. Modi's ongoing tenure as Prime Minister of India. To talk about the Modi-Trump visit, some of the interesting things happening with popular struggles in India, we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show by Abdul Rahman, who is a reporter with the essential People's Dispatch. Abdul Rahman, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, great to have you with us. And I'll start here, I think, with the Modi-Trump visit. I mean, obviously, in Trump's first term, the two were very close, have continued to be close as Trump was out of office and now back in. But a lot of issues sort of on the table: immigration, tariffs, military deals. I mean, give us a sense of what happened at that meeting and if anything notable came out of it.
Well, whatever was reported in the media in India in particular, we see it was only about gestures. That what happened basically. Modi met Trump. Trump did certain things which basically talked about how tariffs India is going to face reciprocal tariff, how we are going to deal with India is going to buy more defense equipments from US, how India is going to buy more oil and other things from the US. And apart from that, they also talked about certain things. For example, the extradition of one of the persons which are wanted in India. So these are the things by and large which happened, which were reported in the media in India in particular, emphasizing that this is one of those visits where both of them showed the great bonhomie, the great friendship they have apparently. And it seems that Trump has realized with this meeting, I'm talking about Indian media, how they reported that India's significance and so on and so forth. They also talked about the immigrants, the so-called illegal immigrants, what we generally call the undocumented migrants, the deportation of all of it, and the questions which were raised during the press conference. It seems that India agreed with the way the deportation is happening, and how India is ready to take back its citizens only if it is proven that they are Indian citizens, and so on and so forth. So these are the things which happen, and this is also the content of the joint statement which was made after the meeting was over. So these are the things. Yeah.
So, Abdul Rahman, you actually wrote about the consequences this meeting had in India based on some of the reactions there to this meeting. There was this cartoon that was published in this very old, now digital magazine, that basically was sort of mocking Modi for his behavior with President Trump, depicting him in chains at their recent meeting. And the reaction was to block this digital magazine, and that led to protests and criticisms over press freedom and government censorship. So I'm curious if you could speak to what the blocking of that magazine reflects about broader concerns with regard to press freedom and government censorship in India under this administration.
Well, the magazine under which we are referring to is Vikatan, is a Tamil language magazine which is more than 100 years old. It published a cartoon which basically referred to the way the Indian deportees are chained whenever they are transferred in the military plane, and so on and so forth. And of course, India under Modi has been extremely intolerant to any kind of depiction, whether it is in the form of cartoon or whether it is in the form of any serious intervention, article, videos, whatever. For example, a documentary which basically depicted how Modi, during his tenure as chief minister of one of the states in India, had a role to play during the anti-Muslim, anti-minority rights in 2002, was banned in India, and the media organization, which is BBC, was raided following it. Apart from that, we all know the case of NewsClick, how it was dealt with only because it has a critical stand on some of the policies which Modi government has been following for more than a decade now. And there are many such examples, how, for example, one of the largest media organizations in India, like NDTV, was forced to be sold to one of the, you can say, cronies of this government. And there are certain other examples. So the point is, what happened to Vikatan is basically is part of the sequence, or part of the things which have been happening against the media organizations, against the press in India under Modi regime, which basically is extremely intolerant to any kind of criticism. And particularly, if you are critical to Modi as a person, then you are basically you face much more severe action, and that's what happened. Of course, because there is some kind of space left where there is an opposition, there is left forces who have been vocal to this kind of attack on media in India. And that's what happened in the case of Vikatan as well. What we saw that all the opposition, including the left, came out in open against this particular attack, calling it attack on press freedom, and which basically forced the government to later on kind of lift the blockade on the website. So yeah, this is basically a symptom of Modi's regime or Modi government's intolerance towards press in India to any kind of criticism.
Well, you brought up the point of NewsClick and what happened there, and one of the major issues in terms of the crackdown on NewsClick was their coverage of the farmers' struggle, which has continued to be ongoing. I know in Karnataka there's now an open-ended farmers' strike. Could you talk about that and what it says overall, what the ongoing issues are for farmers and their continued struggle here against the center?
Well, there are farmers' struggle going on all across India at this moment when we are talking. Apart from the Karnataka thing, which you referred, there are also struggles going on in northern India, what we call Haryana, Punjab, Delhi. The farmers in and around capital Delhi have been agitating. And by and large, the demands are similar. They are all talking about the attempts by the Modi government to introduce the big corporate interest in Indian agriculture. We should know that in agriculture in India is basically a profession which is dominated by the middle and small farmers. These farmers have very small land, and they cannot. Millions of people depend on agriculture for their livelihood. So more than 40% of Indian labor force is dependent on agriculture. So if the big corporate is introduced, of course they are going to suffer, and therefore they do not like Modi government's attempts to do it. But Modi government has been very consistent about it. They introduced 3 laws in 2019, which they were forced to take back because of the agitation. They have tried to do it again recently, and therefore there is a resurgence of the struggle. Apart from that, the farmers are also angry about government's intervention on behalf of the big corporate houses to take their land for different kinds of projects. So, for example, building a factory, building highways, building all sorts of kinds of projects on the land of the farmers without giving them adequate compensation, and without kind of looking for ways for those who are displaced because of this process. Because they lose their land, they have no other way for their life to earn their livelihood, and hence they basically fall into the trap of poverty and debt and so on and so forth. So they want to avoid it. So what is happening in Karnataka is primarily a struggle against government intervention on behalf of the big corporate houses to acquire land for other projects, and not finding ways for the rehabilitation of those who are displaced in the process, apart from demanding minimum support prices for the agricultural product, apart from basically saying that the government should procure more of the agricultural products, because if it is left to the private corporate houses, what happens that none of the farmers get adequate price for what they produce. So, for example, just to give an example, if the wheat is produced per quintal per 100 kgs of say 3,000 rupees, or say around $100, just to give an example, is the cost, they are not getting even that cost recovered by when they go into the market to sell it. And so they heavily depend on minimum support prices. They heavily depend on the government procuring it so that they can earn some profit. They have some money, some savings, which they can again use to reinvest it. So because they are not getting adequate prices, they are basically selling in distress, And this is happening because the government has refused to procure what it used to procure. So increase the procurement. So these are the major demands which the farmers in Karnataka, the farmers in northern India, the farmers in other parts of India have been raising, because they have been a victim of the attack of the neoliberal market forces on agriculture, and particularly when there is no alternative for them. There is no alternative employment. There are no alternative ways to kind of earn livelihood. So that basically is an attempt to find ways so that they can survive economically.
So you've also been covering this crackdown against academia as well. And there was specifically a crackdown recently on student activism at this New Delhi-based university, Jamia Millia Islamia. Sorry if you can correct my pronunciation of that. But I'm curious if you could talk about, first of all, what happened in this particular case, especially with regards to the university administration's collaboration with police. And then also, what does this reflect about broader trends of dissent suppression under this government? And I guess we're kind of going back to a similar theme here.
Yeah, exactly. So what is happening to Jamia Millia Islamia is basically has happened to several other universities in India since this government has come to power. And in 2014, Jawaharlal Nehru University, another major university in Delhi, is another example. There were several attacks. So the basic issue here is Jamia Millia Islamia has been at the forefront of, in opposition to Modi's attempts, the BJP government's attempts to basically kind of introduce Hindutva politics, introduce majoritarian politics, and attack the interest of the religious minorities in the country through the citizenship law. And of course, there are several other instances since 2014. If we start counting them, that will take a long time. So I'm just going into the point that the attack on minorities has been an issue in Jamia Millia Islamia, but the university has been regimented because the administration has completely been controlled by the government, and they do not allow any kind of activity, student activity, which they think can be explicitly political. So they are not allowed to have study circles. They are not allowed to have meetings, public meetings. They are not allowed to have any activity which have explicit political tone. And therefore, students have been fighting against it. Because the whole idea of university is to basically get all kinds of exposure possible as a student, and therefore they have been raising the issue of freedom of expression. They have been raising the issue of political freedom. They have been raising the issue of rights, and of course clubbing it with the larger issue of the attacks against religious minorities. And because they have been raising the issue, what happens that the administration targets the students. In this particular case, for example, they suspended around 24 of the students. They published their photos, their names, their personal details made it public without considering this the privacy issues, the threats it can pose to students, particularly the students coming from the remote areas, the women, girl students coming from different parts of the country, first generation learners do not have social capital to stand against all those things. So despite all those concerns, they did that. And they have been refusing to take all these things into consideration and address the student issues. So because of that, what you see that the students are agitating against it. They have been protesting against it. They have taken the protest out of the university now, have gone to different parts. It is spreading. But of course, given the fact that it has Modi government has a huge control over country's media. None of this is being reported as it should be reported, and therefore we do not exactly we are not in a condition to tell you the details which are required, which are necessary. And so whatever sources we have, we can gather the information and tell you that this is basically a fight. What happening in Jamia is a fight for the democratic space, which both the students and the overall general political dissent, the opposition requires in India.
Mm-hmm. Well, Abdul Rahman, we appreciate you being willing to walk through all of us. I hope everyone's following your byline at People's Dispatch, where you're covering a huge range of stories across South Asia and beyond. peoplesdispatch.org. Thank you so much for some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, it's really unfortunate that India has this horrific right-wing trajectory that, a lot of that can be related to the U.S. And what we're experiencing there in many ways. But it's just, I think more blatant in your face fascism. And I'm glad that we get to cover it on this show, which, we've got other parts of the world to get to as well. It's one of those around the world kind of days. Indeed it is. And we want to turn now to the German elections, very consequential elections for what the future of Europe could look like, what Europe-US relations will look like, what could happen with the war in Ukraine. So a lot at stake here in Germany's upcoming elections. And we are very, very honored to be joined once again on the show by Sevim Dağdelen, who is a member of the Bundestag in Germany for the Alliance Sahra Wagenknecht party and the foreign policy spokesperson for that party. As always, Sevim, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Hi, Rania. Hi, Eugene. I'm very pleased to be here.
Well, as always, it's great to have you. And as I'm sure you know well, Americans are hearing a lot about the German elections because Elon Musk has become a big supporter of the AfD, but we hear very little about the BSW. So that's where I wanted to start, just to get a sense of, how are you all seeing the challenges facing in Germany and some of the issues you're highlighting for voters in the run-up to the polls?
Well, as you said, you don't hear much about the situation. The German economy is undergoing a heavy crisis at the moment. And the situation is characterized by economic stagnation. So among industrialized countries, Germany is at the bottom of the table when it comes to economic growth. Mass layoffs are now also on the cards in many companies, and not only in the car industry. So during the ongoing budget discussions, it has become abundantly clear that the federal budget is dangerously overstretched. Germany cannot shoulder the impacts of this self-destructive economic war against Russia, of rearmament on a massive scale in the context of NATO, and of military support for Ukraine, which has cost 37 billion euro alone over the past 2 years just for the military aid to Ukraine. And the sanctions, they cost us, the economy in Germany, about 200 billion euro. So this economic plight is being further worsened by corresponding cuts to education, infrastructure, and social services. So furthermore, 1 in 6 people in Germany is at risk of poverty at the moment. So these massive burdens are destroying the middle class and threaten to push millions more people in Germany into social decline. And the problem is the broken coalition consisting of the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberals and supported by the Christian Democrats, has had a disastrous economic policy record over the last 3 years, with the economic war against Russia and a failed energy policy of high prices, for example. These parties have been at the helm of a truly process of deindustrialization, saying in order to avoid having to import energy directly from Russia, cheap energy, by the way, German companies have, for example, imported Russian energy at significantly higher prices via India and Belgium as LNG gas. So not the pipeline, the cheap pipeline gas we are importing. No, we are importing LNG fracking gas from Russia through India, Belgium, Netherlands, and sometimes even Azerbaijan. And in the course of their friendly support for the United States policy of confrontation, the second pillar of the German industry's international competitiveness is now also at risk of being destroyed after cutting off cheap energy supplies from Russia, a move that only backfired on Germany. The country now wants to get involved in US-American sanctions against China. And if this happens, it will inescapably lead to the destruction of trade relations with Germany's second largest trading partner, China. And that's really a disaster for Germany. So we are witnessing a process of deindustrialization that calls into question the entire development of Germany after 1870, including the German welfare state model, which will now come under even greater pressure. And this is the situation we are facing at the moment. That's why BSW is we are committed to putting, we say, the existing Nord Stream pipeline into operation again, in repairing the destroyed lines so that we can have once again get cheap and competitive gas from Russia. This is good for the population to lower the high energy prices, and it's good for the industry.
You know, Sevim, since you mentioned Russia, BSW leaders such as yourself have been outspoken voices about the need to seek a peaceful settlement in Ukraine. So how important is ending that war for addressing many of the other critical challenges, much of which you just mentioned, you know, like the rising cost of living and economic growth?
Well, it's, for us, I think it's an existential question. And that's why the federal elections on the upcoming Sunday are existential for us, because we are currently conducting the decisive election campaign of the last decades, because war is back in Europe. The danger is far from over. For 3 years now, we have had to endure insults for demanding a ceasefire and peace negotiations. We from Sahra Wagenknecht Alliance for 3 years. I bet you know this method. For 3 years, they have told us that we are Putin trolls, Kremlin party, Moscow friends, Moscow assets, and so on. But I do believe that the agreement to open peace talks and the first meeting in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia are to be welcomed without reservation. So this agreement opens up a perspective for an end to the killing and dying in Ukraine. And every day that the slaughter continues, there is one day too many. So, but while the American President Trump, and that's the insanity of Europe, while the American President Donald Trump is negotiating with Russia about peace in Ukraine, what are the Europeans doing? And the German federal government and maybe the presumed next Chancellor Friedrich Merz from the Christian Democratic Party, they want to continue the war alone. 700 billion euros are to be mobilized for this after the election. It came out by chance that our genius Minister of Foreign Affairs, Annalena Baerbock from the Green Party, she just said it by chance, that they are planning a 700 billion package. That means, and while Trump and Putin are agreeing on joint projects in the Arctic, the European Union wants to intensify the economic war. They just finished the 16th package of sanctions against Russia, while Trump is saying that he is lifting the sanctions for 20 banks of Russia. So I can only warn against undermining the agreement on peace talks. So Germany must not continue to be and that's another problem we are facing, the danger that Germany and Europe has to be the paymaster for Ukraine. And this will be at the expense of our children and our pensioners. A real bloodbath of cuts in our country's social services is looming here. So that's why we as BSW say we need an independent German foreign policy, independent from the US policy, and we are calling also for a halt to the financial gifts to Ukraine. And just one thing I would like to add, as much we welcome this agreement for peace talks between Russia and US, as much we are criticizing that Germany is going to be the payer for Ukraine, and also the poisoned proposal of the US administration that the Europeans, and especially the Germans here, have to secure the border between Ukraine and Russia in case of a ceasefire. You know, you have to know the border of Ukraine and Russia, it is about 2,000 kilometers long. And it's just insane to think that Germany, with our background, with our historical background, could do such a job. And I think it's practically not possible anyway. It's a mission impossible, and that's why it's poisoned.
Mm. Well, you know, this conversation about the potential into the Ukraine war has raised a lot of other issues, especially what is the sort of U.S. European, U.S. German, U.S. French, what are the relations going to be between the U.S. and Europe? I mean, it seems that the whole conversation is revolving around militarism, is basically what should the future of NATO be and the relationship there. But given the long relations between our two continents and the various nations, I mean, I wonder how you all in BSW are seeing this conversation. What should a U.S.-European relationship look like? How could it be more productive?
Well, we are not against the United States of America. It's our biggest trading partner. And we do believe as BSW that we need good relations to all the superpowers and the big powers. So that means we have to have good relations to the United States, to China, to Russia, and of course to India, to Indonesia, to South Africa, and to Brazil as well. So this must be our interest. It's our own original interest to have good relations to big powers. And on the European soil, it has to be a very original interest to have a good neighborhood. That we are a folks, a population of good neighbors. That means, you know, you can change some things in the world, but you cannot change the geography. And Russia is part of Europe. So that means we need good relations to our neighbor, Europe, as President Trump stated, between Europe and the US is a big ocean. So they are pretty far away. But the thing is, Russia is just on our next doors. That means we need a good relations, and good relations mean we have to have good trade also. We have good social contacts, and because we do like this and we do need this, we have to have a independent, more sovereign foreign policy in Europe. But that doesn't mean like the one from Macron, because Macron is just following a neo-colonialist and militarized foreign policy. We need more Charles de Gaulle here in Europe. That means more sovereignty. So we do not need, for example, the 40,000 US troops on German soil. We do not need the nuclear bombs of the US on German soil. They can take them away and take them back home, but we want to have good relations. And in regard to the NATO, I do believe that it's more than time to abandon NATO and dismantle NATO. We need in Europe, we need our own security order, our own security architecture, including Russia, because security is only possible if it's a common security, if it is a common security which includes Russia. Security without or security against Russia is not possible in the European continent, and that's what we have seen in the last 3 years. Of course, we have to consider the pretext and the prehistory of this conflict, but also we can see there is no security possible without or against Russia, and that's why I think we need our own security architecture not following the US, what is throwing the allies and the vessels under the bus whenever they want to, because if it's in their interest, but we have to follow our own interests, and our interest must be to have good relations here in the neighborhood.
You know, speaking directly to the issue of the AFD, Sevim, as I'm sure you know, there are people like Elon Musk who are presenting AFD to Americans as this anti-systemic force that's disrupting the neoliberal status quo. Do you think that that's a fair depiction?
No, not at all, Rania. The AFD is certainly not an anti-system party or systemic party. Its program stands for radical neoliberal politics. It stands for oligarchs like Elon Musk. Sure, the AfD, like the Sahra Wagenknecht Alliance, is in favor of a ceasefire and peace negotiations in Ukraine. But that's where the self-proclaimed peace party or opposition party or alternative ends. So like the government parties and the conservatives and even the left party here, the AfD supports the genocide in the Gaza Strip and the arms deliveries from the Federal Republic of Germany to the right-wing government of Netanyahu in Israel. So it defends policy spokesman, the arms lobbyist, Colonel Lucassen said, for example, quote, full support during the anti-terror operation, even if it leads to unpleasant images, quote end. So in contrast to the BSW, the AfD supports military operations by the German arms abroad if they serve German interests, they say. The AfD supported the admission of Sweden and Finland into NATO. So the AfD is a pro-NATO party. And AfD leader Alice Weidel, who is supported by Elon Musk, believes that Germany must spend 5% or even more on military armament. So this disqualifies the party once and for all. The gross national product was 4 billion euros, and the federal budget last year was 470 billion euros. So the Alice Weidel, therefore, believes it is right to spend over 40% of the federal budget on armament. That means more than 220 billion every year for armament. That's what Trump, by the way, wanted from the NATO states in Europe. And at the same time, Alice Weidel and the AfD, they insist on maintaining the debt brake and want to cut taxes on a large scale. So anyone who can do basic arithmetic knows that this doesn't add up. So, but what is much more worse is that even if her demands are only partially implemented, Alice Weidel is calling for large-scale social cuts. So this would make one of the most important articles of our constitution obsolete. So the Article 20 states, the Federal Republic of Germany is a democratic and social constitutional state. And armament mania and social cuts are two sides of the same coin. So the AfD's plans would lead to considerable losses for employees, the unemployed and pensioners in Germany. And as we already know from the policies of the old parties, the US oligarchs will certainly be able to cope well with such a party, as we can see, but to the detriment of the population in Germany. So Elon Musk is not very anti-systemic. He is using the state structure, the country, for his interests, and that is what he sees as an anti-systemic party. If you consider this as anti-systemic, like Elon Musk, okay, AfD would do the same. Yeah, a little bit of this, but normally they are just neoliberal militarist party like the other ones.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sevim, as always, we really appreciate you helping sort through all of this. The eyes of the world are going to be on Germany this upcoming Sunday. You are the foreign policy spokesperson for the BSW, and also, I must add, author of NATO, A Reckoning with the Atlantic Alliance, which you can buy at 1804books.com here in the States. But as always, thank you so much for some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much. The countdown is on for Sunday. And keep up the good work, Rania and Eugene. See you
Excellent.
soon. Hopefully.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Oh, Elon Musk.
Yes, Rania? Yeah, I know.
Elon Musk.
Well,
before we move on to the next guest, Eugene, I just want to remind our audience to please smash that like button, you guys. It helps boost us in the algorithm.
Come on,
Exactly.
man.
Yep. Okay, that's it. There it is.
That's the
Got
voice
it.
of Joe Biden. Wow, I forgot that guy existed. Remember when he was committing a genocide and
I do.
then he lost the election? Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. Then anyways, Kamala Harris. Long story.
Yeah.
Speaking of that genocide, there's a good segue to the next guest.
Indeed. Well, we want to move on to some of the issues surrounding the ongoing ethnic cleansing, genocide, and apartheid moves of the state of Israel, particularly how it has been concerning Palestinian political prisoners. We are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Basil Farash, who's an assistant professor at the Department of Philosophy and Cultural Studies at Birzeit University in Palestine. Basil, thank you so much for being back with us.
Thanks, Eugene. Hi, Rania.
Well, great to have. No, please. I'm doing well. Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us. And I wanted to start here because, we've talked a number of times on this show about the conditions inside of Israeli prisons for Palestinian political prisoners. But I mean, it's really been on display for the world during the exchanges that have been happening in the ceasefire as people have been coming out. I mean, it's hard to describe the images of how some of the prisoners are looking, especially compared to how they looked going in. So I wanted to just hit that again because people have seen these images, and I was hoping you could talk some about what that reflects about the conditions inside of the occupation's prisons.
Yeah, thanks, Eugene. So you're very right. I mean, I think people witnessing the release of Palestinian prisoners, actually, we're waiting for the last stage of release this coming Saturday as part of what's referred to as phase 1 of the truce deal. The images of Palestinian prisoners, the testimonies that they gave after being released from Israeli prisons are at an attestation to the violence and torture that they have long been subjected to, not only since, of course, October 7th, but since the beginning of this carceral regime. But in fact, this violence has escalated. It has immensely increased since October 7th. I think one thing that's very important to allude to as well here, in addition, of course, to the violence, the fact that we know that these Palestinian prisoners were subjected to multiple forms of beatings, of torture. At least 58 of them have been killed inside Israeli jails. In fact, the Israeli authorities still retain the bodies of Palestinian martyrs who were killed in Israeli prisons since October 7th, and others whose bodies have been held before the war began. But what's important here also, I think, is questioning why do this Israeli Zionist regime utilize these forms of violence and torture. We all do know that, at least in our experience as Palestinians, that torture is central to the Israeli Zionist discourse. But I think the images that we have seen, the way in which the Palestinian prisoners were in fact treated before their release, I'm sure Rania and Eugene, you might have seen the statements that Israeli prison service personnel placed on the arms of Palestinian prisoners who were released. For instance, some of them read, the eternal people will never forget. Yesterday, there was a video clip of the Palestinian doctor Hussam Abu Safiyyeh, the Israeli news, I think it was news channel 13. It released a propaganda video of this doctor who was arrested and actually held arbitrarily from the Gaza Strip. In one of the segments from the kind of 2-minute video that I saw, on the wall of the cell where he's being held, it has the same statement that reads, "The eternal people will not forget." And I think there's something here harrowing about not only the violence that these Palestinian prisoners, visibly it appears very visible on their faces and their bodies, but also this kind of intention to racialize, to dehumanize Palestinians, and to inflict this kind of suffering, not only during their captivity, but in fact during the moment of their release. And I think that's where we understand the Israeli regime, because it's inflicting this torture and violence even in the moment that Palestinians actually treat as the most sacred, which is liberation, which is freedom. Even if in that moment the Israelis insist on exerting the most amount of violence, the most amount of torture, in comparison, in my opinion, to the ways in which the Palestinian resistance factions have been treating Israeli prisoners, the ways in which they actually, when the war began, when the genocide began, the Palestinian resistance factions said They declared, if you release Palestinian prisoners, we will release all Israeli prisoners. Of course, the Israeli government did not do that. I think this is something very important here to discuss. And I think it tells us something about the nature of this Zionist regime.
I mean, I think those are really important points to make, especially the juxtaposition between what we're seeing with the Israeli prisoners being released and the condition that they're in versus the horrific conditions, missing limbs, obvious signs, physical signs of torture, not even to include the mental torture taking place. And also the fact that these people that Israel is holding, I mean, they include doctors and medics and patients and I mean, among many, many others, also political activists, of course. But in terms of the people they're holding from Gaza, I know images came out of Dr. Hossam Abu Safia in recent days showing him shackled with obvious signs of torture. And this is somebody that was just a doctor. Sorry, you look like you want to say something about that. Go ahead.
No, I'm asserting to what you're saying. It's what the Israeli regime has been doing since the war began, and of course prior to that, is in fact really arresting an entire population. It has been placing an entire population captive. Rania, you are very, very right that since the war began, they arrested most segments of the Palestinian society. So we're talking about doctors, teachers, students, where I work, professors, labor unionists, children. We've seen, I'm sure all of you and the audience has seen the images of children being arrested, humiliated. I think, again, not only it attests to the nature of the Israeli carceral regime, but also to this level of brutality that I think it's incomprehensible, right? It's something that, of course, we do understand that, this is a colonial endeavor, but again, at a moment where you are exchanging prisoners, I think that particular moment tells us something about how you view yourself, how you view humanity. And of course, it does not have any form of humanity, the Israeli regime, because in that particular moment, the testimonies, Rania, that you alluded to, the prisoners actually did share these stories, and they said that the moment before their release, before they were handed over to the ICRC, to the International Committee for the Red Cross, they were beaten, they were humiliated. The video of Hossam Abu Safia yesterday and other prisoners, again, tells us something about this nature of this carceral regime. They're shackled to their hands and their feet. Their bodies are very frail. Why are they frail? Because the Israeli authorities have been systematically denying them food. The 58 Palestinian martyrs I spoke about did not die simply because their life ended in Israeli captivity. They died because Israel exerted violence. They died because Israel denied them medical care. They died because Israel has been systematically denying them food. And these conditions, in addition, of course, to the isolation, we are talking about Palestinian prisoners who have not been able to communicate with their family members for over 16 months now. I think that by itself is an enormous amount of psychological torture. It's telling us something about the nature of the Israeli carceral regime. But again, it's a very brutal reality. And here I have to say, this is not novel. It's not new. Because the Israeli carceral regime since 1948 has been practicing these methods, these violent methods. But the difference is that it has been waging a revenge against an entire population through the carceral regime. I think the images of Palestinian prisoners being released in that state is, again, it's an attempt, I think, to tell Palestinians who are still in this limited freedom we are living under, that if you dare to resist the occupation, this might be your fate. And that's why they are publishing these images of Palestinians being tortured. That's why we heard the story of the Palestinian being gang raped in Sidi Timan. Let's remember that incident, of course, right? So there's this level of brutality that's faced with complete impunity by the Israeli regime. These soldiers, these prison service personnel, actually, in fact, I should also say this. Sorry, yesterday the clip I referred to about Hossam Abu Safia, and this is very true. It has a journalist. From an Israeli journalist. He's wearing a bulletproof protector. He's inside an Israeli prison, and he has a baton in his hand. So you can also, question this mentality. This is not a journalist. They're raising these citizens to become these brutal figures that unleash this violence against anything Palestinian. And that's why we understand. That's why we see these images of women, of children, of doctors, of teachers being held in Israeli captivity. Because in the Israeli mentality, in Israeli discourse, any Palestinian is a threat, especially if you are resisting.
No, it's a good point, and I mean, it seems, you know, it covers just all aspects of society. I mean, it's a slight shift, but what you were saying made me think about this is when we look at the images of the West Bank. I mean, the way that they just tear up every form of infrastructure. I mean, it makes you, well, I mean, I guess it does make sense when you think about it, but I mean, it's an amazing statement. They say that, well, we're going in here to get quote unquote terrorists, and then, you know, they seem to spend all their time actually just tearing up the roads and destroying medical centers.
Yeah, of course, it's you know, it's part of this terror that Israel is inflicting on an entire population. That's why I said, you know, this, if we look at Israeli prison policies, they really do refer to broader logics that Israel uses against the Palestinian population. The way it has, as you referred, Eugene, as you discussed, Eugene, the way it has divided the Palestinian territories in the West Bank, the settlements, the roads. The fact today, since October 7th until now, the Israeli authorities have been kind of also escalating violence in the West Bank. And many Palestinians do not leave their villages and towns, not because you're not, you know, you can't. Because actually, in fact, if you think about leaving, for instance, Ramallah or Jerusalem, you do know that you would spend hours at checkpoints. You might be returned. So the Israelis did actually manage to fragment the Palestinian territory, to even fragment it even more, to turn the Palestinian cities, villages, refugee camps into also carceralized locations where they're also entrapped. So in a way, Israel has transformed the prison experience into a broader experience that all Palestinians are subject to. And I think that's why we can only understand the Israeli regime if we look at imprisonment or the carceral logics that they have been implementing. Even our ID cards, Eugene and Rania, you know, the fact that just tell you, it's not just, you know, a system of racializing Palestinians. No, it's a way of entrapping them. It's a way of enacting this total sense of surveillance, in addition to, of course, this brutal violence that we have been witnessing inside Israeli prisons. And I think I mentioned this before, but if we think about or wonder, why does Israel, and this is very relevant, I think, to the scenes we've witnessed today of Palestinians handing over the dead bodies of Israelis held in the Gaza Strip. Why did and does still the Israeli regime hold the bodies of over 600 Palestinians captive, either in cemeteries of numbers or in freezers? This is, you know, it's not an academic question, right? There's something else that's taking place here. The Israeli regime is holding these bodies, and also they're not holding them just as bargain ships, as they say. No, it's something to do with the brutal sense of this occupation, of this colonial endeavor, that views Palestinians dead and alive as a threat. Imagine this: a Palestinian who's killed inside prison. For instance, Walid Daqqa, who we discussed, who we talked about when he was killed in April of last year. Why do you hold his body and deny his family the right to burial? There's something not horrific only about this logic, right? It's terror. You're inflicting terror on an entire population to tell this population that you should not think about resisting. You should not think or dream about a better future, a better life for your children. That you should stay, as they have been practicing against Palestinian prisoners. You should put your head down and say, yes, sir. And this reminds us of, I think, of what Fanon says, Frantz Fanon in his Wretched of the Earth, that the colonizer would never stop until the colonized subjects to the authority of the colonizer. And I think that's how we understand the logic of Israeli brutality. Again, why does Israel hold these bodies? And the Palestinian resistance factions, they, you know, today we saw this, you know, this scene where they handed over 4 dead bodies of Israelis. And I don't know if you saw the images. One of the banners behind them said that Netanyahu killed those prisoners, those Israeli prisoners. And it's very true. The Israelis do not even care about their own citizens. They could have ended this genocide day one. They didn't. They, in fact, intentionally attacked the locations where Palestinians were holding Israeli prisoners. It tells us something about the nature of this regime, I think, again.
No, absolutely. Well, a lot to keep following, a lot to keep sowing. As always, Basil, we appreciate you helping us sort through it all, and we will continue to do what we can to cover it. Basil Farah is assistant professor at the Department of Philosophy and Cultural Studies at Birzeit University in Palestine. Thank you again so much for your time on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for your time, Rania and Eugene. Thank you.
Wow. I mean, it just doesn't end. It doesn't end. And, one thing we didn't get to touch on, but hopefully will in a future episode, is what Israel's doing all across the West Bank, which is, I read in the New York Times earlier this week, Eugene, 40,000 people made homeless.
Yeah.
I mean, 40,000 people, but because of what happened in Gaza, that just kind of doesn't register.
Yeah.
But 40,000 people in just the course of the last couple months in operations across the West Bank by the Israelis made homeless, and they're demolishing and blowing up entire neighborhoods in the West Bank. Like, they're very clearly demonstrating and even saying they want to kick as many Palestinians out of their homes as possible anywhere they exist and then take over.
Yep.
And you still have a media that will cover it up and name it things that it isn't. Instead of saying ethnic cleansing, they'll be like, oh, all these Palestinians were recently displaced. Like, okay, by accident, or like, what? Can you give us some details, please?
No, it's a good point. I mean, it's criminal malpractice, quite frankly, when you look at a lot of this coverage. Well, let's move on to another critically important story, and that's the ongoing conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is, of course, also regional in many different ways. And we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show by Claude Gatebuke, who is a survivor of the Rwandan genocide, the co-author of the book Survivors Uncensored, and the executive director and co-founder of the African Great Lakes Action Network. Claude, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Great honor to be with you both, Rania and Eugene.
Well, it's an honor to have you here. And I guess I wanted to start because with this point here, I mean, the Rwandan government has essentially held out that its support for M23, its entire purpose for doing everything they're doing in the Eastern DRC, is to protect the people of Rwanda from a renewed genocide. It has nothing to do with minerals or anything else. And I wonder how you respond to that justification being put out there by the Rwandan government, M23 and others.
Before I start with that, I'll just have to echo what Rania just said, that the mainstream media covers up not only the previous segment, what's happening in Palestine, but also what's happening in Congo today. This is the deadliest conflict since World War II, and it's the most underreported. So I just wanted to underscore that. Now, to respond to your question about, Rwanda's justifying, basically, I know you called it support for the M23, but it's really Rwanda and Uganda have invaded Congo. Over the last 30 years, since 1996, Rwanda and Ugandan troops have gone into the Congo, and I'm looking at this, some of the images. Some of them show the rebels, some of them show the Congolese military, but you can't tell the difference. A rebel group in an African country or most other countries, some of them are going to have on a red Michael Jordan jersey. Another one's going to have a purple Kobe jersey and some sandals. The M23 is a well-equipped Rwandan and Ugandan army that are invading the Congo. Now, with Rwanda saying that they are doing it to protect Rwandans and specifically ethnic Tutsis from another genocide or because they're discriminated against, it's a big lie. It's simple. If you're going in a place to fight discrimination, why do you go and start amputating women's genitals? Why do you go and burn people alive, bury people alive in major massacres of just horrible disproportion? And then why do they go to the mines? If it's about freeing people, why occupy the mining towns and free the people themselves? So it's and then millions of Congolese, more than 7 million Congolese people have been displaced out of their homes as a result of this invasion, war of aggression by Rwanda and Uganda, with the support of the US and the UK and the European Union. These are the countries that fund these two governments. They train them militarily. They provide military support. They protect them in the media, And they also shield them from accountability whenever things like, for example, a couple of times there has been reports that show Rwanda's involvement in the atrocities, not in the freeing of the people, but in the atrocities in the Congo by UN groups of experts. The US mission to the UN has attempted on multiple occasions to block those reports from being released. And the only reason why we saw them in the public is because they were leaked to the media. So what we have is Rwanda basically going in there. They're behaving like Israel, going in there and going and massacring all of these Congolese people and saying that they're fighting for the freedom of, now they've changed it from Congolese Tutsis to Kinyarwanda speakers. They are the first, actually, when Rwanda first invaded Congo, they went after Kinyarwanda speakers. They went into the refugee camps of Rwandans that had more than 500,000 people in those camps, and they surrounded them and started bombing them. That's we've got that in our books, like people's testimonies of what happened in those refugee camps. They're doing that now. They're going into refugee camps and destroying refugee camps. How do you know, and how can you tell the difference between a Hutu, a Tutsi, another ethnic group in the Congo, a Luba or whatever other group in the Congo, from a Kinyarwanda speaker when you are shooting indiscriminately into the crowds? You can't tell, and it's just a really bad excuse. And anybody that believes it, they believe it because they are just supporting the Rwanda government, not because it's actually the truth.
Claude, I think you made such an important parallel with the idea of this is like the way Israel behaves on a number of levels. I mean, I think especially the invoking one genocide to justify horrific violence that's actually being done in the name of imperialism. In both those cases. And in the case of what Rwanda is doing in Congo, I'm curious if you can explain to us what role do multinational corporations and Western governments play in enabling the plunder of Congo's vast mineral wealth through this sort of proxy war that's, Rwanda is at the forefront of?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because I had missed that, actually addressing that when I first, spoke about Rwanda's invasion and Uganda's invasion of Congo. What Rwanda's military and Uganda's military serve as in Congo is basically local mercenaries who are securing the mines in Congo's resources. Congo is the richest country in the world in terms of natural resources, with $24 trillion, worth of minerals. And what it is what Rwanda and Uganda provide. They provide access to those mines. They go, they displace the people, they occupy the areas, they enslave the local population. You have children as young as 10, 11, 12 working in the mines, long hours, horrible conditions, and then the resources are plundered out of the Congo. They're taken to Rwanda and Uganda, and they're shipped to the global market. And there are companies from all over the world. There are a lot of companies from, surprisingly or unsurprisingly to many, a lot of Canadian companies on the Toronto stock market. A lot of companies from the US, from France, from the UK, Belgium, and a number of other places that are in the Congo exploiting the Congolese. So what it is it's a war to secure the resources in the Congo. And Rwandan troops and Ugandan troops are providing the local mercenaries to do that, to displace the people, but also to secure those interests. I'll give you an example. In northeast Congo, near the Uganda border, there are some oil reserves. Right now, French oil company Total is exploiting those oil reserves. And guess who is giving them access to those reserves? It's the Ugandan troops. And so that is really what it is that's happening. You have two African dictators, Yoweri Museveni of Uganda and Paul Kagame of Rwanda, who are darlings of the West, and who are providing that access to the resources to the multinationals. So the multinationals, actually, some of them pay these armed groups to secure the mines for them. And so it's there's also a Swiss Dan Gertler, Glencore is one of the largest mining companies in the Congo. He's actually been found guilty in U.S. By the U.S. Of crimes. Yet he's actually, his company and he himself is still involved. I believe Dan Gertler is an Israeli, by the way. I'm not 100%. I have to double check that. But he's an Israeli business person, and his company is exploiting the Congolese people. Been found guilty, but has not, been held accountable for those crimes. So that's just a few of the examples. But the key is that these troops are there to secure the resources of the Congo, to make them cheap for these multinationals, so that they are able to be super profitable. A few things that we get from the Congo, the gadgets that we use, electronic gadgets that we use, are powered by coltan out of the Congo. The lithium batteries, so many things that are happening with the green revolution. The resources that are used for that, the raw resources that are used for that, come out of the Congo. Last thing, Rwanda has virtually no coltan in its soil, but it is the top exporter of coltan in the world. And if you look from the time that Congo was invaded, there are two things that happen if you look at Rwanda's economy. One is the export of minerals not found in the soil of Rwanda and Uganda, by the way. They grew exponentially, as if all of a sudden they found ways to mine and discovered mines, and just overnight were able to ship to the rest of the world that much resources. The second thing is Rwanda's economy has grown, is one of the fastest growing economies. It's still subsidized, highly subsidized by aid, foreign aid. But it's, and also some of the numbers have been questionable. But a lot of the development is using resources plundered out of the Congo. So those are the two things, two signs. I mean, sometimes there's a saying in Kinyarwanda that says, you're never mistaken about who stole from you. You just don't know where they hid your property. In Rwanda, they can't really hide it that well, because there's obviously the exports to the global market, and there's also the visible development at the expense of Congo, especially the Congolese people.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the last few minutes we have here, I also want to ask you about this issue that we've seen from many of the Western powers who are long supporters of Congo. Now, they're all kind of falling over each other to put out these statements saying they want a ceasefire, they want this, they want that, essentially trying to escape any real responsibility for their support for Rwanda. And of course, supporters of Rwanda are really playing this up, especially on social media, saying, oh, look, this sees how the West is actually against us, not for us, as we're being accused. So I just wonder how you see all that.
My view of the attitude of the West toward Rwanda, I believe when you say supporters, Western supporters of Congo, you meant Rwanda, who are falling over themselves to
yes,
to put out all these. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. So they're putting out all these statements, but from what I've seen over the years, it's lip service. And lip service is not, that's just performative stuff. It's not really until something happens where we've seen before. Right now, Rwandan troops and Ugandan troops in the Congo call themselves the M23. They always use all of these acronyms. So this is the latest incarnation. There was a previous incarnation of the M23 in 2012 that had displaced almost 1 million people. And what happened in a space of a few months, what happened was Western countries actually decided to withhold aid from Rwanda. And within months, the M23 disappeared. They went into the camps in Uganda because obviously the money was drying up. And they went into the refugee camps in Uganda. And then 10 years later, they sprung back up and came back and invaded Congo. So they have leverage. They don't use the leverage. They just do lip service. They do a lot of talking, Right now, for example, in the European Union, 2 examples with the European Union. A couple years ago, they put out statements condemning Rwanda's support for the M23. Turned around and gave them $20 million to not for education, not humanitarian aid, to the military, $20 million. And they said, oh yeah, this is just to go to Rwanda's operations in Mozambique. By the way, Rwandan military is there to secure French oil, Total's access to the oil in Mozambique. They give them those $20 million as if the weapons that they're going to get or whatever military equipment they're going to get, they're not going to use it in the Congo. So on one hand, they condemned. On the other hand, they gave him money. Right now, in the European Union, there is a debate on putting sanctions on Rwanda. Right, the French president Emmanuel Macron is getting in the way, and it seems like France is the main one getting in the way. Had they put sanctions on Rwanda in terms of economics, they also have a memorandum of understanding for exploiting raw material for worth almost $1 billion over the next few years. If they were to stop those things, Rwanda would not be able to afford. It's one of the poorest countries. In spite of that growing economy, it's one of the poorest countries in the world. They would not be able to invade the Congo. They would not be able to maintain this military presence and occupation of the Congo. So I find it hypocritical. I find it to be lip service. And until there is action, I think it's a lot of talk to look like they're doing something and to also distance themselves from the public outrage against on the atrocities being committed against the Congolese people. And it's thanks to news media like yours that's actually putting this out, and individuals doing this work. It's not because there is anything else that's pushing them. It's because people are speaking up.
Claude Gatebuke, survivor of the Rwandan genocide, co-author of the book Survivors Uncensored, and executive director and co-founder of the African Great Lakes Action Network. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side and sorting through all of this.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, I think that it's really important for people to continue what's happening in the Congo, because like we started out in the beginning of that segment with Claude, I mean, the media portrayal of what's happening, it's almost like it doesn't even give you a proper narrative. It makes it too confusing to understand. And again, I always go back to it portrays it in this very like racist zoo-like way, where like all those animals are just killing each other and we don't know why. That's just what happens in Africa. Like, and then of course there'll be the propaganda embedded in that, if you can even understand the geopolitics of it. But it's really stunning given the fact that in order to continue to steal, literally rape Congo of its resources for these multinational corporations and for Western imperialism, you have to make the people of the world, especially in the countries that are profiting off of it, as ignorant as possible about what's happening.
That's right. That's right. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, let's move forward here to our next topic, which is a critically important one, and that is, well, whether or not we should be expecting any significant changes in the post 9/11 national security, quote unquote, architecture, now that we've got some controversial figures, at least according to the U.S. media, in various positions in the national security state. And we are very, very happy to be joined here on the show once again by Kevin Costello, who's the editor of the Dissenter newsletter. You can find that at thedissenter.org, and also the host of the show, The Dissenter Weekly. Kevin, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, it's good to see both of you again. And we're not talking about Julian Assange.
You know what? I think that's probably the best news we've had so far here in 2025. Right. And I have to say, Kevin, you have been on top of all these issues, for so many years. And here we are having these congressional hearings. Kash Patel has been confirmed as the FBI head. Tulsi Gabbard is DNI. And at least for the first time, there's some discussion in terms of, Section 702, the Patriot Act, all these different various issues. I guess the question is, was there any indication to you during the hearings, or maybe in the lead up to them, that any of these people, whether we're talking about Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, I guess there's John Ratliff at the CIA, and others, are committed to some sort of reform here in some of these widely disliked spying policies?
So I think before we go into like the individual personalities, we should pull back, and everyone who's watching the show should be aware that there's something deliberate that was done on the part of Republicans during President Joe Biden's administration to consistently raise the specter of the weaponization of the US government, and to really use language that I think is appealing, because people who are on the left, who have engaged in activism and who have borne the brunt of repression from the FBI, could understand and empathize with that kind of language. But for the most part, when you looked at what they were uncovering through a series of hearings that this subcommittee did, you were not seeing really anything that significant. These were people who were basically culture warriors, who were objecting to trivial or frivolous nonsense like, oh my, this parent raised her voice at a hearing over their kids having to wear masks during COVID and got ejected from the school board hearing, and then was treated like a terrorist allegedly, but oh no, they actually weren't put on a terrorism watch list ever. And that, I'm just giving you a kind of example of like what they made a big deal out of. Now they worked and worked and worked, and they went after Joe Biden's administration for, continuing to further this narrative that Donald Trump and Russia colluded, and that was the sole reason why we had the outcome that we did in the 2016 election. And there were people who objected, and there were abuses of surveillance against people who were in the Trump camp, and those were actually corroborated. So they've taken all of these things, and then they've aligned this group of people, and Tulsi and Kash Patel, much more than Tulsi Gabbard, comes out of that group of people who feel affronted by Biden and the Democrats going after them. And now they mean to exact revenge on those people, which is what we've heard. And that's not just a narrative that's coming from CNN or MSNBC because that's the way that Democrats or liberals feel. I truly believe that they want to use that framework to legitimize using the surveillance apparatus, the national security state, to go after people. Now, do I think that they're going to go after the kind of boutique liberal crowd, the former Biden, the Clinton Democrats that are regularly haunting us on MSNBC? No, I don't actually think so. But I think they're using them to convince the public that it's okay to use the surveillance state to go after certain people. And those people are going to be the same people who have always been targeted. We're talking about prison abolitionists, solidarity activists, people who engage in potentially labor organizing. It could be people who, are involved in providing humanitarian aid abroad for you can just go down the list, and it's the same type of people we always hear about as potentially being threatening, because they are actually challenging what the US agenda is globally, and they do pose a threat to the objectives that are trying to be achieved.
I'm curious if we could talk for a moment about Tulsi Gabbard specifically, because Kevin, obviously her the way she navigated, I should say, her confirmation hearing ended up going viral in many ways. We give it, what she said about Edward Snowden, what she said about Syria, what she said about NATO. So I'm curious what you think that means about Gabbard, specifically her mixed political history. I mean, obviously, she's also really turned to the Trump side of things, and even, got a bunch of neocons like Lindsey Graham, galvanized neocons like Lindsey Graham to basically approve of her and be on her side. So I'm curious, do you see her potential leadership as DNI under Trump as as possibly a challenge to the post 9/11 surveillance state? Or do you see it, given her shift on a lot of other issues, as a continuation of the kinds of government overreach, and that's putting it very, very kindly, that we've witnessed over the past several decades?
So Tulsi Gabbard might be the least despicable figure that has been trotted out to work for the Trump administration. I mean, I think alone, when she was doing her own thing over the last 3 or 4 years, there were lots that we could say that was appalling, but she managed to find a group in which she kind of looks angelic among them in a way, because she goes before these senators, and it was hard to argue with a lot of what she was saying. And I think that we should genuinely appreciate the fact that James Clapper was director of national intelligence when Edward Snowden blew the whistle on mass surveillance, and he lied before Congress and never faced any consequences for that perjury, even though it is a crime. And in fact, now she came before these same groups of senators that are supposed to hold officials accountable, and was talking about things like a warrant requirement for surveillance, like saying that you should follow the Fourth Amendment of the US Constitution when you engage in whatever surveillance the government is doing. Now, I am concerned because there were a few things that she said where it sounded like she was either not remembering the state of surveillance, or just basically playing down to these senators so that she wasn't able to get confirmed without saying anything that would make them upset. Like, for example, we did have a reauthorization of surveillance last year that was hugely problematic, and many civil liberties groups were upset about it. It was what people here sometimes referred to as the 702 section of the FISA, of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And this is basically a kind of provision that allows the government to do surveillance of almost all kinds of communications. And it's particularly directed at people who are not in the United States. But there's a whole database of information that FBI agents can search for without really any oversight, and they can target Americans. And that's the objection here. And that we found that Black Lives Matter activists were targeted. We found that there were actually, like, believe it or not, right-wing activists that have been targeted through that. There were people who were involved in January 6th that I think were targeted through that. There's members of Congress. There's other people who, without a warrant, there's political donors who were targeted through this. And basically, she didn't know that they had just granted this authority to the government where the NSA can come into a business if they have a Wi-Fi router and just demand them be spies for the government, and that they have to work and actually collect data for them that they can use to target people. And so that's a little bit concerning that she didn't know, but she did actually address these concerns. And I think, like, no Democrat voted for Tulsi Gabbard at all, not even Senator Ron Wyden, who actually was the only senator who wasn't having meltdowns over Edward Snowden during the proceeding and asked real questions to Tulsi Gabbard. But, I think people should appreciate that she does care about this surveillance. And also, I think we should appreciate that this person had this background of supporting a whistleblower like Edward Snowden, who, these Democrats and Republicans obsess over him just so much. Like, next to Julian Assange, this individual might live rent-free in their minds more than, like, anybody else, apparently, especially the ones that are working for for Top Secret America, as it was once called after 9/11. I mean, they just couldn't get past the fact that she wouldn't call him a traitor, and spent about 75% of the confirmation hearing trying to get her to just use that word, even though by a legal definition, he's not a traitor, because he wasn't even charged with that by our government. That's actually a crime. But I mean, I know that you don't really care, but it's just that, like, he committed a leak, and he's been charged with violating the Espionage Act, and they sit there and they spend this whole time. But I think it's also, like, very conscious too. And this is one thing that I think you all appreciate very well, is that, like, going after Tulsi Gabbard the way they did is something that I've always objected to because of their approach. I mean, they want her to be seen as like a Putin puppet, or like some kind of, nobody had a worse day when Tulsi Gabbard got sworn in than Barry Weiss. So calling her an Assad toady is like, that's what was on the minds of Democrats the whole time that she sat before them. And yet None of that matters to the ODNI, by the way. I mean, I kid you not, I had no idea why she was being asked her opinion about the assassination of Soleimani, when that is not anything that the ODNI will ever have to deal with. They're not making military decisions about who is going to be executed for the sake of U.S. empire at all. They are there to handle the apparatus and tools that are at the disposal for collecting data. And that might serve, it might eventually be data that goes to these military operations to facilitate these military operations, but she's never going to be involved in pulling the trigger or putting her finger on any buttons. She's just there to oversee the functioning of this massive surveillance state.
Well, and I think that brings me to the piece I wanted to ask you about before we let you go here, Kevin, which is for people who are seriously concerned about this surveillance state and have been seeing it develop, especially since 9/11, where it feels like it's so out of control. Obviously, the rubber will meet the road at a policy standpoint. They're going to have to reauthorize some of these things, some of the other points. What are some of the things, and you've spoken to some of them here, that people should be looking for, or advocating for, like if they want to really see change, like beyond any atmospherics from anyone at any side? Like, what are some of the things concretely people should, say, write their congressman about, so to speak, if they want to be engaged in the discussion?
Well, Palestine first, because that is the framework in which everyone's all going to be targeted. We are all Hamas sympathizers in the United States at this point. Whether somebody truly embraces that or not, that is going to be first and foremost how anyone who speaks out against what is happening in Gaza or any parts of the Middle East gets treated, or they'll be accused of being aligned with Iran, because we know they're going to go after Iran. So I'm thinking in terms of those narratives that are going to be pushed upon us and how this is going to be weaponized. And I also would just beg of people to really consider the dismantling of the administrative state that is happening before us as these federal government employees are being fired, and how they're going to repopulate it with new people or contractors that are going to make it just worse for us, make it even easier to go after people who are engaged in this activism or advocacy. Journalists, I mean, look, I've come on this show regularly to talk about the war on freedom of the press from the standpoint of what happened with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. It must be said of Kash Patel that he said very clearly that if he was the FBI director, he is going to come for the media. Now, people have heard that, or they've heard Donald Trump say he's going to come for the fake news media. And they've said, well, we're talking about MSNBC. We're talking about 60 Minutes. We're talking about CBS News. And don't they print lies? Don't they put out lies? Don't they put out broadcast news segments that are propaganda? And that might be so. And there might be people here who don't think that we should stand up for them. And I don't always think I should stand up for them, because they don't have any solidarity for me as an alternative or independent journalist. And they also have legal counsels. They have legal departments that can take care of them and stand up for them. But I will say that they know exactly what they're doing. They know that there is widespread dislike and distrust for the U.S. prestige media, as I like to refer to them. Some people see them as legacy media, traditional media, however you refer to them. They know people are disgusted, and they're starting with that to chip away at the freedoms that we have to publish, to print, to speak out, to engage in general freedom of expression. And then after they get away with a few things like defamation lawsuits, stopping the publication of information, maybe going after a few journalists for leaks, it's just going to be a way to open the dam and go after all kinds of other journalists who we can all agree shouldn't be targeted. And they're going to start to go after people who there's a lot of debate and discussion over whether they're terrible people or not. And we should just be mindful of the fact that whatever you think personally about what news you wouldn't consume, that doesn't mean that those people should be thrown in prison. And it doesn't mean that we should have a country where people go to prison because they're spreading false information or even misinformation, because that's not the kind of country that I want to live in.
Well, Kevin, you are covering everything involving our civil liberties with a fine-tooth comb. So I hope everyone checks out thedissenter.org, becomes a subscriber to the Dissenter newsletter, and checks out your show, The Dissenter Weekly. As always, it's an honor to have you here. Thanks for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Rania?
Well, Eugene, we really did go around the world.
We sure did. And I have one more thing I just wanted to note about the world, and that is the recent designation. I think it was yesterday. I've been traveling, losing a little bit of track of my days. Might have been the day before yesterday. Donald Trump has designated basically all of the Mexican drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, which is important because of what that means. And Elon Musk actually quote tweeted what it means, that they're now eligible for drone strikes, something that a lot of far right Republicans and others who, hate Mexican sovereignty have been talking about for some time. But let's remember, under the Obama administration, this was what was established, the drone strike legal framework. People may mean that a lot of it was actually based on Nixon's justification for invading Cambodia during the Vietnam War era, which is essentially that the country involved doesn't need to give you any sort of agreement for you to launch an attack against someone you've declared to be a foreign terrorist organization with drones. That was the Obama building on Nixon level approach. So whether or not they will drone strike Mexico is unclear, but they've now set up at least the basis by which they could launch drone strikes or other forms of raids or incursions into Mexico, allegedly under this foreign terrorist authorization. Now, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has said that she will look now to enshrine some of the laws that already exist in Mexico preventing foreign agents from having legal ability to act in the country in this way into the Constitution. So yeah, another flashpoint here, but at least opening the door, the Trump administration is, to some sort of intervention into Mexico, which of course would be a total fiasco, launching drone strikes. I mean, we've seen what the launching of drone strikes has done in Somalia. They launching drone strikes all the time, but somehow there's Al-Shabaab stronger than they've ever been, it seems. What we've seen in Pakistan over many years, in Afghanistan over many years, in Syria over many years, in Iraq over many years, in Libya, in Yemen, all around the world, this is always presented as this panacea. We're going to come in and drone strike this person or that country or this group, and everything's going to be fine. And it only seems to exacerbate these conflicts more and more and more. And the stage is open to that. And Elon Musk, who seems to be like the co-president or something, talking about this opens him up to drone strikes. I mean, it probably gives you a sense of what the internal conversation has been like in the Trump administration in the lead up to this designation of these cartels.
Yeah, and I think that, you bringing up the places that the U.S. has used these drone strikes on, and the fact that they're not actually about defeating anything. I mean, when you think about the drug cartels, those cartels, probably some of them are working with the United States.
100%. Look at all the money they're making. It's coming to U.S. banks. I mean, these people are all, anyway, sorry.
Yes, I mean, that's a whole part of the story too. But, the fact is that you have a government in Mexico that's very progressive, that has demonstrated it is willing to invoke its sovereignty, to use its own resources for itself, to develop itself. And the U.S. has repeatedly smeared that government, smeared the party, the Morena party that both AMLO was head of, and now Claudia Sheinbaum, the new president, is in charge of, because they don't like their progressive policies, because you can't be a neighbor of the U.S. without being completely subservient to the U.S. And so, it's not some sort of coincidence. These cartels have been around forever, as far as we remember, right? And we, like you said, these cartels, like, they put their money in U.S. banks. It gets laundered in U.S. banks, for that matter. And so to suddenly say you want to fight a war against these cartels, but literally this means bombing Mexico. They're laying the foundation for bombing Mexico. It's not about the cartels. That's about controlling Mexico, using leverage against Mexico, trying to make sure Mexico doesn't get to have its own sovereignty, because so that the U.S. can continue to dictate to Mexico what their policies should be, their economic policies should be, to benefit the U.S. rather than the people of Mexico.
No, it's a great point. It also opens the door to extraordinary rendition, other things like that. And since they're making these allegations that the Mexican government is involved, all they have to do is, and of course, any individual could be involved in anything. So all you have to do is either manufacture something or find some corrupt person or whatever, and you could just rendition them to Guantanamo and, start to attack the actual structure of the Mexican state. So it'll be interesting to see how this, plays out. And I just want to note, as President Sheinbaum herself has pointed out, the vast majority of weapons that these these cartels are using are coming from the United States. So I've seen a number of Mexican commentators point out, how is it possible that, you know, there are weapons that are allegedly only for the U.S. military ending up in the hands of these cartels? So a lot of unanswered questions on the U.S. side of the border, which of course is the main market for all of these drugs. So perhaps if we really wanted to address the cartels, we should address our own problems here in the United States. But that will bring us to the close of the show once again this week. Rania, anything you would like to leave our viewers with before we get out of here?
Yes, Eugene, I want to remind our viewers that if they appreciate independent media like Breakthrough News, they can actually participate in it by supporting it. And you can do that by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news and becoming a member for as little as $5 a month, where you can access exclusive content and exclusive merch. I also encourage people to go to our website, breakthroughnews.org, where you can make a one-time donation. Whatever you can do to chip in and help will help keep us going and growing here at Breakthrough News, more important than ever as we, you know, apparently live in a country that's prepared to bomb Mexico at some point. Insane.
Yes. Well put. Well, that will bring us to a close. For myself, for Rania, for our whole BT News team, thanks so much to all of our guests, all of you who viewed, and we will see you next time.